totally muted. All right. Okay. So I'm screen sharing and I am recording. So we're going to just run through Keyshot one more time so we can get an idea of what we have going on here. So the first thing that you would do is bring up your import and think about what you want to import. Remember, we went through our that's 21. Where's 22? Here we go, CAD 1. Okay, so I should have a ring demo in here. Wait, cancel. Let's bring that in again. I clicked on it too fast. Ring demo 001. Oh, wait, actually, let's go with the render file, because that means that I went into Rhino and I was double checking things on how I want to have it render. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this import. I think before we just did import and let it do the defaults, but here I want to say, so we're adding it. Let's keep it at default for adding to the scene. Now the position, this is important. We want to have it snap to the ground. And I also want to make sure that it knows that the Z is my up orientation. Now, if you model something that it turns out somehow you modeled it upside down, you can actually change the way that it comes into Keyshot, but it's better to just keep in mind the way that Rhino usually works. And usually the Z direction is the up direction. I like to have the geometry centered and I like to have it snap to ground. If I don't, then if I'm modeling and part of my model is underneath the ground plane, and let me bring up what I mean by that. So this is a bangle. So if it was here and I brought that in, it would show up like halfway through the floor of where we're trying to render. So we don't want to have that. All right, so I want to import the NURBS data. The camera and the environment, that's all fine. Adjust the camera to look at the geometry, adjust the environment to fit the geometry. So, you know, if we brought in a truck, it would make the environment bigger. Unlink materials by layer or keep them linked. Apply materials from the library to matching source names. So if you start to assign materials in Rhino, and the materials panel is the one with the little paint thing. If we added one there, let's say it was paint, and then we could play with the color here, you know, maybe make it like this weird red. So this way, if I was rendered here, actually, I've added a material, but I have not assigned that material to my piece. So here I'm doing that. And that's like a red paint. So if I brought that in, and let's bring this in instead of the other one that I was going to do. This is actually in my CAD II folder. So I was working on some stuff for them. And okay, and before I do that, over here, I want to make sure that I save. Because if I don't save the changes in Rhino, then when it brings it in, it's not going to have it. So now we'll bring in, you can see I just saved it at 12:14. We're going to open that up. And again, here I've got my default up orientation Z, center geometry, because this is how I usually change it. The next time, you know, as long as I am still in the same session, I don't have to change it. So the NURBS data and unlink materials by layer. Or let's do this, apply materials from library to matching source names. So here, when we bring this in, look, there we've got a color for our bangle. And I can just move around here using my right mouse button and change the camera adjustment. Actually, if I bring up camera, as I do this, you'll see how all these angles move over here. So this is actually a bangle, but I guess we could suppose that we could pretend it's a ring since we have it here already. Now, environment. Right now, the environment that we have in is this guy, which is the startup. That's this one. One of the ones that I like is where I can drag around the colors. It's the balanced, here we go, the startup balanced 4K. I think that's the one. Yeah. So this one has a lot of different light sources and shadows. And what I can do is I can actually drag these around over here. Now, remember in Keyshot, everything on your left-hand side or in the library panel is what you can add to your scene. And remember, this main window is called your scene. And so we've got that. And then once we drag it onto here, it appears over here in our project window. And then you can look at all the different things that are set up for your project. Like, for instance, I can go to the material, and here, if I want, I can change that color a little bit. Maybe I'll make it just a slight bit greener. That'll darken it up. Maybe a little, yeah, let's go here. And that takes that there. And then, yeah, that looks pretty good. That's the diffuse color. Now the specular right now, all the reflections on that are all white. We can actually change that a tiny bit and see what that does. Yeah, it gives it just a little bit different. Let's go back to the white and see what the difference is. It doesn't change it very much, but if that's something that you want to play with, the specular, the roughness of the material itself, you can play with, and you can get a little more texture. This is really helpful, especially because we're usually modeling something. We're usually rendering something that we've 3D printed, and we almost always get texture with 3D printing. Let's play with our refractive index. You can see how everything just blurs up a little bit as it starts to change the settings. And we're going to change the refractive index a little higher instead. Okay, there we go. That's not too bad. Drop that roughness a teeny bit. Textures, this doesn't have any textures, but we could load textures in here. Labels, we're not going to label anything in that. But so here's our material graph. If you guys remember how Grasshopper worked, this is a similar thing. It's more like a visual way of looking at our materials. So with this, we could take an image and put it in and have that lead to the diffuse, the specular. We can actually add different properties to this by clicking on that plus sign. Perhaps you might have, for instance, that fabric that we saw during the startup. You may have an image of fabric that you want to put in as a part of the texture. And so, there are lots of ways to play with this. And quite often you have to spend a little time with it. And remember, just like with Rhino, there's no risk to playing around, and just don't save or undo. Undo is your friend, especially when you work with things that are software based. So now if we look in the main scene window here, we can see our model. And this model, doesn't really have any, it only has the one part. So it's just default, and it's listed as having paint. Okay, so now where are we going to go from here to create a rendering? Okay, so we've got our material, our camera, the environment. I might even want to mess with this a little teeny bit. If I move this up slightly that way. Yeah, I like the shadow. I like that we have sort of a gradient area here. Does that move that over to the, it's what we're playing with now. And actually, if you notice, I don't know how well this is coming through in the, but we're actually getting sort of this shadow back here almost has a reflection of the color right in this area, which is kind of interesting. Let me drag this down and see what that does with it. Yeah, we still have it there. All right, so I'm going to keep these up here. These these lights and shadows are more right at the level of the piece. And then this one's down real low. We're going to put that guy here and this guy about halfway there. And I just like to move things around and see when it gets to where I like it. I like this because I have good contrast all around the edges. I can sort of see this form. It's definitely, you know, it's got this smooth surface, but not quite. I actually, looking at it now, I want to make it a little bit more rough. It's almost too smooth in some ways. And actually, looking at that now, that color almost seems like sort of skin-like, and I'm not sure that I like that. So let's go with a less realistic looking color. Now look at this like hot pink. Yeah, do I really want it that pink? There we go. This is more like a color I want. We could play with that. The surface is still, we're gonna hit okay. The surface is still not quite as rough as I'd like. There we go. Now we're getting a little more matte. I don't like it too. I wanted to have something. It's still really smooth though. Yeah. Okay. Well, but it's a nice matte surface. It's not too shiny. I don't like my things to be real shiny. When things are real shiny, you run into a lot of issues with reflection. And the other thing that can cause a longer rendering time is when you have transparency and inner reflections. So it's really cool to have a piece that looks like it was cast in glass and polished, and that's really cool, but it may take longer to render. And the other thing is you want at least a couple of your renderings to look realistic, to kind of look like what you emulate, what you're hoping your piece looks like. So once we get this scene set up how we like it, I like this. I like the shadows in here. I feel like I can get a good idea for this form here. This is the only spot that's maybe not quite as modeled as I would like. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up some renderings now. And remember, you are going to save these out, and you want to make sure that you check before you hit that add to queue or render. You want to make sure you know where they're going, because the default for these is on your C drive, which is on the computer that you're logged into. Here's where we'll want to switch it over to the server. And this is CAD 1. Right, CAD 1, Spring, Barbauer. Okay. And I have a Keyshot folder here. We're going to select that. Okay, so we're up on the Z drive. Great. We're going to do these in JPEGs, which is fine. Now my resolution, let's look at the resolution presets. I'd like to have this like 1600 by 1242. That means this is what it would look like if I printed it at 300 DPI. Now, if I was going to open this up in Photoshop, I could ask it to render layers, and then we could put each pass as a different layer, and then we'll open it up in Photoshop and we can edit them later. That's a lot of work. And unless it's something that you're really wanting to tweak like that, I wouldn't recommend that you do that. Let's just keep it simple. And we're not going to render the layers separately. Region, let me see. Oh yeah, this is if you wanted to just render part of it. You would set up a crop. But so here we go. And I'm going to call this view 1. Okay, and they'll add that to the name that I have for this file. And I should save this file. But I'm going to add that to the queue. And now we're going to close that. The queue is still out there. I haven't put anything in the queue. Now I'm going to change the view here. All right, so now we're kind of looking down on this piece. We're going to render again. We're going to call this view 2. Also, that's in the same preset that I had, same size, great, JPEG, add to the queue. Let's also change this. Let's also do a TIFF of that second one. All right, so now we have, let's look at our queue. We have 3 different things that we want to change. Let's look at some of our other options. Mode default, background, we can add we have our background, whether it wants to put it in. Render engine, yeah. What this means, the real-time view is what we're seeing when we're moving around and working in Keyshot, because Keyshot is constantly every change that we make, Keyshot goes and works out what it should look like at that. And that's the real-time view. So let me now, I don't, notice if you go too far this way, your ground plane disappears and it looks like it's floating in the air. You want to avoid that. It doesn't look realistic that way. I kind of, this is top view. That's not too bad. Let's render that too. Let's go to output. And we'll call this view 3 top. Okay, and we're going to add that to the queue. All right, so after all this playing around, let's see what happens if we move to a different backdrop. Woof, boy, that's bizarre. Horizontal backdrop. Oof. There we go. Now, what's interesting about this is that you could totally get, if this was more reflective, and let's say we take the roughness down completely, this is what the reflection looks like. Now that's kind of a funky, it's pretty funky. Let me see if there's anything I can do with this. Oh, wow, I didn't know you could play with this in the, okay. Yeah, you can actually play with these stripes. All right. So maybe we want to do this as a render too. We're going to go one more render here. And we're going to call this zigzag. All right. I'm going to hit add to queue. Let's take a look at that queue. All right. This is roughly what we're looking at. We've got that guy, this guy, this guy. Oh, that's the TIFF version of this. Then we have this. Okay, so what we can do now is we can process this queue. And what it's going to do is we'll watch it. It's going to open up each of these renderings. Now, if we could see the bottom of it, yeah, you can see it's taking its time with the rendering. You can see how far along it is. And this is view 1. It's going to take a little bit. It probably takes a little bit longer because here I am, I'm in Northeast Philadelphia doing this on a computer at Temple University. So there's one. There's our next one. These are kind of big images, so they take a couple minutes, but well, not a couple minutes, not very long at all, really. But yeah. Okay. Okay. So that one's almost done. The TIFF is going to take a little while, and the TIFF was the third one, if I recall correctly, because here's the, yeah, now we're going to do the TIFF. TIFFs are bigger files. TIFFs are, Photoshop will open them and edit them and save them as TIFFs. They're not quite a native, it's not a native Photoshop file, but it is a high quality image file that also includes layer information. So you can save a TIFF you can save a Photoshop file as a TIFF and be able to edit it in other image editing software with the layer information. Okay, so here's the, I think this is a JPEG. Oh no, this was a TIFF too. I forgot to change it back. So all the rest of these are going to be TIFFs. Now that I see, yeah, I did that. I forgot once I changed it to TIFF to not go back to JPEG. All right, so we're going to let these finish. Does anybody have any questions while they're finishing? Because we're going to open them up and I'm going to show you the image files themselves. Where's my, I don't even see you guys. Yeah, here's our funky one. It's kind of fun to use these different reflections because they actually help to communicate the form, especially when you have a real subtle form like this that's not got a lot of edges to help define it. So yeah, I mean, that took what? Here we go. We're at 25. It's probably going to be about 30 seconds. Yeah, there we go. So that's the end of our queue. If I wanted to, I could save this. We would save the whole package. But before we do, let's make sure about where it's going to save it. Yeah, somehow I ended up in Advanced CAD. Oh, I guess that's probably the last person to use Keyshot on this computer. So I would want to go to the metals, CAD I, spring 2022, and we're going to save that here. And this is going to be Bangle render. Okay. All right. So we've saved that. I'm going to now close Keyshot. We're going to go into this Keyshot folder and we're going to look at the images from today. And we should have just a preview. Let's try preview. There we go. Okay, so that's our last one. Let me move my Zoom thing out of the way here. Sorry. That's the last guy. Let's see if it'll go to the first one. Here we go. There's our second one. And that's the third one. The third one is the TIFF. And as you can see, there's like no difference between the two of them. Here's the top view. And there we are back to our funky rendering with the zigzag background. All right. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now and see whether there was any other questions or any questions. I know you guys are all finishing up the various work of your projects. So it's important that we have a rendering of the ring. It's important that we have the rendering of your dragonfly. And I would like to see, actually, let's check. We have a, I know that, oh, we're not doing that. Go back. There we go. Oh, sorry. I have to go edit that out later. Okay. Assignment. Let's see whether we've got our project one. Nope, I'm going to have to put that together. All right. Let's go back to here. Okay. All right, we're going to stop the recording now. And if I can find the little thingy. There we go. All right, stop the recording.